Let me get started here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Better Way Thursday series. We're super glad you're here today. My name is Katie. I'm a social media marketing manager for Tech Moms, and I will be facilitating today's webinar in place of Robin. We have an amazing session lined up today. It's focused on workplace advocacy and disability rights. Today's presentation, it will define disability in the workplace and cover all the legal aspects of disclosure and reasonable accommodations, and when to disclose, how to disclose, etc. This topic is super important to Tech Moms, especially because as a lot of our students are alumni are navigating career switches and re-entering the workforce. So knowing your rights and how to advocate for yourself is a really big deal. I also want to introduce Ani from the Tech Moms team. She'll be monitoring the chat and helping field both live and anonymous questions at the end. So feel free to drop your questions into the chat. She'll, if it's something that's pertaining to what they're talking about right now or in that moment, then we'll go ahead and talk about it right then. But otherwise, we'll keep everything else toward the end. And if you did drop an anonymous question in the link that was provided over the last couple of weeks, those will also be answered at the end. So we're excited to be joined by Leah, Josh, and Ben. They're from the business relations team at the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation. So with that, I will turn it over to Leah, Josh, and Ben to introduce themselves and go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you do. Let's start with you, Leah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Lobato. I am the Business Relations Coordinator with the Utah State Office of Rehabilitation, Department of Rehabilitation Services. We are a division of the Department of Workforce Services, and all my contact information will be in the slide deck that you will have access to as well. I am a Latina. I'm about 5'2", though that does not matter on this virtual screen. Curly hair, glasses, sitting in my office wearing a green sweater.
Let's go with Josh, and then I'll wrap it up with my intro after Josh.
I wasn't sure where we were going, but perfect, Ben. So my name is Josh Rodeback, Business Relations Specialist with the state of Utah as well. So part of Leah's team. I supervise a program called Choose to Work, and I cover our Choose to Work specialists from Salt Lake all the way up to Logan. Visual description for me: white male, dark hair, beard, gray shirt.
Excellent. Thank you, Leah and Josh. And thank you, Kate, for having us here. I'll go ahead and share my screen as I give you my intro and description. Okay. And hopefully everyone can see that. Okay, I'm on the wrong slide here. Let me get to the top. My name is Ben Baldonado, and I am a supervisor with the business relations team. I am a Hispanic male, about mid-height for a male in the high 5-foot area, in my early 40s, tan skin, wearing a green sweater with a white collared shirt underneath that. And you may be thinking, why give visual descriptions? We definitely love chat in this whole interaction. So please think to yourself, and if you have some ideas, why visual descriptions in a meeting, whether that's a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting. And throughout today, we're going to give a lot of examples of accommodations, specifically low cost and no cost accommodations. One of it is a visual description, which we do for anyone who is blind or low vision in the meeting. So they get to know who we are, a bit of a visual description, and perhaps we cross paths in the future on that too. I also want to jump in right away at the beginning with how you can do captioning at no cost. So if you are doing any training or meetings and you have PowerPoint or you have the Google slide decks, most slide decks will allow for captioning. Today we're using Google Slides. And if you can see my screen here, you can see that at the bottom where the slides are, there's 3 dots. And I just go up to the captioning portion and I can put what language I want for captioning. Today we'll do English. It's not a perfect remedy. If there's anyone who is deaf or hard of hearing, it's always best practice to have someone who can interpret and do ASL. but this is not a bad option for anyone who wants to do training and have the captions there available. So you'll have them throughout the presentation today. So let's get started. Workplace advocacy and disability rights. First, our disclaimer. We're here as a discussion piece to talk about best practices, talk about ADA, talk about disability in general. We are not lawyers. The information we provide today is not going to be held up by law saying that Leah, Josh, and Ben gave me this advice and I can take it to the bank. That's not our purpose today. Our purpose is to have a discussion, go through this as a group and answer questions as we go. This specific slide deck uses dark backgrounds and light lettering to reduce eye strain and improve contrast. Consider what types of disabilities this accommodation might help or might be helpful for. If you have thoughts, feel free to put it in the chat. There's many ways that this type of background, the dark background with light lettering, can help. One, it's designed to be beneficial for individuals with visual impairments or photosensitivity, for those who experience migraines or other conditions that are exacerbated by bright screens. And of course, this specific slide deck does not entirely benefit all learners. What kind of learners are out there? We've got our visual learners, we have our auditory learners, and we have our kinesthetic learners. Those who are visual learners like to read, like to see pictures, like to really enjoy and engage visually in the content. This slide deck that we have right now is not that type of slide deck. However, if you want to be more engaged and get all the content that you could ever dream of, take out your phones, snap this QR code, and it'll take you directly to a different slide deck, and you can follow along there. It'll have a ton of information, a ton of pictures as we go through that. So if you're an auditory learner, put it in the chat. Tell us who you are. A visual learner, put it in the chat. We'd love to hear who's the visual learners out there. If you're an auditory learner and you just like to hear things and process them that way, you're in luck. You can just sit back, relax in your chair, listen to the soothing sound of our voices as we go through this presentation, interact as you need. And then who's my kinesthetic learners? Those who have to be moving around. A little bit of fidget toys, maybe some Sudoku there on the side. If you're one of my kinesthetic learners, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. And if you have a fidget toy or a pen that you like to punch in and out, go ahead and take those out at this time. We don't mind. We'll move on this one. This is our agenda today. I'll start off with going over the stats and the definition of disability. We want to do that so that we are on the same playing field, that we understand what disability is, what's the definition of disability, and then we can move on to disability disclosure, accommodations, which Josh will cover those two areas, and then Leah will wrap it up with disability advocacy and how to participate. If you have questions throughout, please ask questions in the chat. We'll try to answer as many as we can throughout this presentation. And if we don't get to them during the presentation, we'll make time at the end to do that as well. And we'll also have our team answering questions in the chat as we go. So first of all, think about this number. 1 in every 4. That's 25%. We can even look in this room, 1 in every 4 of us. The chances are 1 in 4 of us here has a disability. 1 in 4 Americans have disabilities. Think about your family, your friends, your coworkers. Either you have a disability or you know someone that does, which means that it impacts all of our lives. What is a disability? Well, the definition of disability within the ADA is having a mental or physical condition that substantially limits one or more major life functions. It can also be a record of impairment which substantially limits and or regarded by others as having a disability. Well, let's work backwards on this. What does it mean to be regarded by others as having a disability? Well, I served in the U.S. military for about 7 years. I deployed to Pakistan. My boss knows that. She knows that I was in the military. And if she assumed that I had PTS, post-traumatic stress, due to my time in the military, whether I have it or whether I don't, I'm protected under the ADA law because I'm regarded as having in that situation. If I'm treated as if I have a disability or regarded as, then I'm protected under the ADA. Now, the main one that most people go off of is having a mental or physical condition that substantially limits one or major life function. So what's a major life function? What are some examples that you can think of? Major life functions. It could be seeing, it could be walking, it could be self-care, working, hearing, speaking, learning, breathing, writing. Yeah. These can all be major life functions. So limitation in one or more major life function attributes to having a disability. And we talked about having a record of that impairment, which substantially limits. Here's a few stats for us. Here in the US, about 50% of those with disabilities have low hearing, deafness or low hearing. That's 50%. This one's interesting. About 2% use mobility devices like wheelchairs. So 2% of disabilities or people with disabilities use wheelchairs or mobility devices, which can be a little bit interesting since our universal sign for disability is the wheelchair, and not as many people use that as we might consider seeing that sign everywhere. Now, this one's one I want you to think about, and I would love to get some thoughts on this in chat. 25% of disabilities or people with disabilities have mental health conditions, 25%. So that could be depression, anxiety, ADHD, go on and on. So mental health disabilities, 25% according to stats. Do you think that's about right in your experience? Do you think it's too low? Or maybe it's too high? What are your thoughts? Most people and crowds that we go around, they find that this might be a little bit too low, that maybe it's a little bit higher than what we see here. And some thoughts on what that might be. Why is that it might be lower than what we experience in life and the people that we are around? Well, quite honestly, there's a lot of reasons why that could be. It could be access to medical providers. It could be stigma. It could be culture. It could be that fear of being labeled with a disability. So there's many of those things. And that's why we go out and we share quite a bit about what disabilities are, talk about the ability side and accommodations and services. At this point, I'll turn the time over to Josh and he'll pick up from here.
Thanks, Ben. So around disability, the big topic is whether or not to disclose. Do I disclose my disability or do I not disclose? And now the thing that I want you to know about this and want you to understand is this is your right. This is your right whether or not you disclose. And the reason you may disclose could depend on a few different things. Some of those things might be, do I have a disability? Okay, if I have a disability, is that disability going to prevent me, or does it prevent me from successfully participating in work activities, training, and related topics? Okay, so if it doesn't, and I have a disability, I might not need to disclose my disability. If I'm not requesting an accommodation, maybe I don't need to disclose. if I am at any point, whether that be I've been called for an interview, well, I'm going to need an accommodation because I need an ASL interpreter. Or maybe I've been offered a job, and at that point of job offer, I say, great, I'm a person with a disability and I'm going to need an accommodation. Here's the accommodations that I'm going to need. Because in order for me to access the workplace, maybe I'm in a wheelchair and I need to make sure that the space is large enough for my wheelchair, that I can easily access my work site. Maybe it's I get offered the job, take the position and start, and later down the road, I'm like, you know what, this is getting difficult, and there's an accommodation that I know that I've used in the past that could really help me succeed here. And maybe this is the point where I disclose that I have a disability so I can get that accommodation. Or maybe I'm somebody that has a disability, but because I've lived with it for so long and I know how to adapt to certain situations, maybe I don't really need an accommodation. So it would kind of depend on whether or not I want to disclose that information. There are a lot of, like we talked about, there are some other times, maybe you have children, youth, students that you work with or that you have an IEP. Some of those things can go on. Some of those things can be transferred to college, to work. And I know that in my past experience as a voc rehab counselor that I had a lot of parents that didn't realize that their youth or their students could get accommodations in college. It's a little different process, but it is there and available. It may not be as in-depth as through K through 12, but it's still a possibility and can still help somebody be successful. So with that being said, there are a lot of different times of when we should and why we should disclose and why we should or shouldn't. Okay. And that's really going to be up to you. Nobody's going to force you to do that. Next slide. So how to disclose? Let's say I'm starting a job and or I've been on the job for a while and I'm going to need an accommodation. I have a disability and I need that accommodation. So how do I do that? This is going to be different for each situation. Just because whether, let's say, like I talked about, going to college, that process is going to be different than if I were starting a job. College will have an accessibility center where you can go and talk about accommodations needed for classes. If I'm starting a job, I'm going to talk to the HR department and say, hey, look, I want to request an accommodation. What is the process here? How do I go about that? And what do I need? So there are things like the EEO office, HR office, and sometimes maybe we aren't sure and we can ask our supervisor, hey, if somebody were to request an accommodation, what is the process? Maybe there's some business resource groups or employee resource groups that we can talk to that might know that information or where to start. And those would be great places as well. So like I said, it's really going to depend. And then from there, depending on, your policy with your employer, that might look different, but you don't need to use any magic words or anything like that, okay? Just understand that it's, hey, I am a person with a disability and I'm going to need an accommodation. Next slide. So what are accommodations? Any ideas? The chat is silent. That's okay. We'll talk about some ideas. A standing desk. That's a great one. Keyboard trays.
Maybe flexible scheduling.
Yeah. Flexible scheduling. Special monitors, chairs. Definitely. Definitely. Remote work. Change to work environment. Definitely. As far as requirements, that can depend. Accommodations are there to help us be successful in completing the jobs and requirements that our employer has set for that position. So that could look really different, and that's going to depend on your employer and your responsibilities. That being said, I wouldn't say that it's a no, but it's going to be a back and forth conversation with you and your employer of what those might be. Because if my performance, if Ben and I'm going to put Ben and myself against each other here. We both have to do certain things throughout our performance year, and connecting with business partners is one of those things. And we have to we have to hit a certain number. And let's say that certain number for the year is 50. Okay. But maybe I've got some anxiety or something around connecting with people. And I go for an accommodation. My employer is not going to change that requirement of 50 employers for the year, but we may be able to work on how I achieve that. How can I get those numbers? Are there different ways that I can get those numbers that maybe Ben doesn't do or doesn't utilize? And so looking at it that way could be that accommodation that I need to be successful. However, my employer is still going to require me to meet that expectation of 50 employers per year. Okay. So you'll want to have that conversation with your employer of, okay, these are the expectations, but how I achieve that might be the accommodation that I need. Flexible schedules, screen readers, interpreters. Yes, definitely. Let's go over a few that maybe some of us take for granted. And you're like, wait, what? I would typically ask for a raise of hands of how many of you have teenagers, but I won't. And I'll just share my experience because I do have teenagers. And in that, there are different things that teenagers like to do right now that may be a little frustrating. They don't like to talk on the phone. What do they prefer? Texting, right? Most of our teenagers, most of our youth would prefer to text than talk. Talking to people is difficult, and I get it. It can be difficult, okay? But texting started out as an accommodation. If any of you remember back in the day when we transitioned to home phones, phone lines, to cell phones, cellular phones, there was a large population of the deaf community that wouldn't be able to participate in that. And so there was a company out there that said, hey, we're going to lose this. How do we continue to utilize these services but still get buy-in from the community of the deaf and hard of hearing? Texting was that option. So texting came to cell phones as an accommodation, to where today majority of us use it to connect with family members, loved ones, and sometimes my boss, because I'm like, I don't really want to tell her what's going on, but hey, boss, I'm sick and I'm not coming in today. Let's go to the next slide. So interactive process. So a little bit of what I talked about in talking about accommodations, what we want to understand is that there are a few things that have to happen when requesting an accommodation. We talked about talking to HR, understanding the policy, the process. Okay, there is that. But at the same time, the other thing we got to think about is this is an interactive process between me and my employer. There are things called undue hardships, and that can prevent maybe my employer from helping me, I wouldn't say helping me be successful, but maybe they don't have the ability to provide certain accommodations. And so working with them and saying, what are you able to provide that doesn't cause an undue hardship where I can still be successful? But at the same time, the employer also has to understand that they've got to do their part to ensure that you are successful as well. Okay, so the best advice that I could give you here, and especially if you have received or know of somebody who's received accommodations in the past, let's go back to the students and the youth. Let's say I've had an individual educational plan through my school for accommodations for class. Let's say one of those things was extended time. I had extended time to complete my assignments while I was in school. This worked out really well for me because I didn't feel overwhelmed and pressured to complete times as quickly as other students because I knew that that was a difficulty for me. Now, let's say I go to my employer. Yes, let's go back to the time that I talked about Ben and I getting employer contacts. Now, the full year may not change for my 50 employer contacts, but maybe they have another metric where it's like, well, you've got to get 50 employers, but we need you to have 15 every quarter or something like that. I could work with my employer and say, well, is there a possibility that I could extend that time? Maybe rather than every quarter, it's every 4 months. I get a certain amount. And that would help me still meet my goals. Okay. So it's that interactive process. Is this going to put my business out to where financially they can't do it, or for whatever other reason they're unable to do it? Is it going to put me out as the employee that this is just going to be too much for me? I'm not going to be successful. And then my employer is going to come back to me and say, well, you're not successful, so we're going to have to let you go. No, we don't want that, because if employers look at it as we can provide an accommodation, one that's going to benefit us and also benefit you as the employee so that we're all successful, that's going to be better than having to let somebody go and retrain somebody, because retraining costs are much more expensive than accommodations. So let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about this. With this process, there is documentation. So an employer, when you are requesting an accommodation, can request documentation. Typically, this will come from your medical provider. Sometimes medical providers are like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do you want me to do? And you can say, well, these are the things this is the information that they need. This is the information that I would like to include, and here's why. And that could be typically what that is mostly it is the diagnosis and then recommendations for accommodations. And there are going to be times your doctor's going to be like, yeah, I know what your diagnosis is, but I don't know what accommodations are going to work for you. That's fine, because we can do some research. There are a lot of different resources out there. One of those being askjan.org. JAN stands for the Job Accommodation Network. And askjan.org will give you ideas for accommodations specifically for disabilities and specific disabilities. So if you're unsure because you've never had an accommodation before, you could look at this and say, well, I've got ADHD. What's going to help me stay on task? It will give you some ideas so that when you talk to your doctor and they say, well, do you have any ideas for accommodations? You can say, yeah, here's some information that I found that I feel will work well for me. That information will then be sent to your employer so that they can start looking at, is this reasonable? Is this possible for us to do to help support this individual and us be successful in this process? Next slide. Now, here's the other part that employers want to know. And sometimes, especially smaller employers that haven't really dealt with this much, are going to look at this. You want an accommodation? I don't know if I can afford that. We're going to have to let you go. Well, good thing is that majority, 50%, up to 50%, I should say, of those accommodations cost $50 or less. Sometimes it's just like a change in schedule is not going to cost anybody. Like, for example, let's say in my job, I'm required to be here at 8 a.m., 8 to 5, right? However, I request an accommodation for a schedule change, and maybe rather than that 8 to 5, because of my request, my accommodation, it's 9 to 6. That way I'm more successful. I'm able to get to my job on time. Due to my disability, I can still make it on time, perform my work during the scheduled work hours, and be done at 6. That doesn't cost anybody anything, right? And so those are some of the things that we're talking about. And that's why we're saying majority of accommodations could be just some little tweaks or changes. And a lot of those are going to cost $50 or less. Next slide. 80% of accommodations requested are going to cost less than $500. This is another good thing because, I mean, there's still other accommodations out there that could come across, and employers are like, I'm not really sure what to do, but you've done your research, you know what's needed, and you can say, look, in order for me to perform this job successfully, this is what I need, and this is what it could cost. Really, that's where a lot of employers are coming from because they're going to be unsure and they're going to want to know how much it's going to cost them. Now, that being said, there may be some that are over these statistics that we've shared. And sometimes an employer say, that's unreasonable for us and that's an undue hardship. And they could come back and say and provide other options. But as we stated, this is an interactive process. Is that also going to work for you? It might work for them, but maybe it doesn't work for you. And that's why you've got to have that interactive process, that discussion back and forth. And so it's always good to know what's going to work for you, but understand that employers also need to watch themselves. They need to protect themselves as well. And that's why I say, when we talk to business partners around disability, a lot of them are on guard. Why? Because one major thing, they don't want to be sued. They don't want lawsuits. They want to be successful. And so being able to have this conversation, back and forth discussion of accommodations so that you're both successful is huge in the world of business. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about accommodations, and we talked about the texting. Ben's done a great job putting some other visual things on here. So we've got glasses. How many of you wear glasses or contacts? I know I do, right? Those are accommodations too, but we don't have to ask for those because typically our insurance provides those. But they do help accommodate loss of vision, or, maybe I can see far away but not up close, or vice versa. So that can help. That helps me be successful. If I were to come here without my contacts or glasses, my face would be closer to the screen than it is right now. And that may be difficult for me or maybe my employer because for whatever reason, right? The other one here is a straw. Ben talked about life activities, right? Major life activities, being able to take care of yourself, eat, drink, bathe, clean, that sort of thing. How many of us have our Stanleys or something like that has a big old straw, right? Straws were accommodations for those that weren't able to pick up a cup, tip a cup, drink from a cup, anything like that. A straw was an accommodation so that somebody could partake of, whether it be water, milk, juice, or anything else. Okay, that's an accommodation. We all use it now. So one of the things that I would say is some of the accommodations that maybe we might be requesting is something that people are already doing in the workspace. Depending on your employer, I know that somebody talked about standing desks. Those might be standard in some employers, with some employers. And so maybe for you in another place, it would be an accommodation, but maybe in a new job, it's not because it's standard practice. Okay. So also, I would say also, determining with HR, what is standard practice and what isn't, and am I going to need to request an accommodation for my disability? Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat box there for a second.
And we can address that up when you're done, Josh.
Okay.
If you want to address that question.
Okay. Actions not required for reasonable accommodations. Now don't remember what this one was about.
I can talk through that. So reasonable accommodations have to be something it's reasonable for the employer and reasonable for the individual. So as Josh mentioned, you cannot request an accommodation that's going to remove the essential functions of the job. Most job descriptions have lots of things on there. Ultimately, most jobs have 3 to 5 true essential functions. So really looking at job descriptions to see what those essential functions are. And if you're an employer, making sure your job descriptions kind of highlight those. Of course, there can be other duties as assigned, but what are the 3 to 5 that somebody really needs to do? Changing production or performance standards, which Josh already mentioned. Excusing violations of conduct rules or job-related or performance plan or write-ups. Those don't get excused when somebody needs an accommodation. If somebody had something happen and was getting written up anyway, and then they choose to say, oh, but wait, I have a disability, those previous issues and concerns still can be a performance improvement activity or write-up. So it doesn't excuse what happened. It just hopefully starts the interactive process so that people can then talk through, hey, I might need something. I don't know what's going on. I might need something to help me be successful. That undue hardship piece depends on the size of the business and depends on the accommodation. So it's really hard to say exactly what the undue hardship might be. But if it is too costly for a small business, if it changes the essence of the job or the services provided, then that might be an undue hardship. And the other one would be a change in supervisor. That would be something that cannot be a reasonable accommodation. Now, they can change supervisory methods or the way the supervisor supervises you, but it cannot be, I need a new supervisor. Like, I really dislike my supervisor. It doesn't work for me. I need somebody else, is not a reasonable accommodation.
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, and you know, what we're really trying to do is promote the success of all individuals with and without disabilities. Because, I mean, if you're successful as the employee, then the business that you work for or support is going to be successful as well, right? And that's really what the accommodations are for, but also to support a person with a disability be successful and be included in job opportunities and other opportunities within the communities, right? We want everybody to be able to participate and partake of the activities, training, education that is available to everyone. As far as like undue hardship, Leah talked about those, nature of costs, resources available to the agency, and the impact of the accommodation on maybe the operation of the facility or the employer, right? So those are the things that we've got to look at, and that's what the employer is going to be looking at as well. Just understand that ADA is not affirmative action. We are always talking to employers and training around disability, and we always say, recruit, promote, and fire the most deserving person. That might sound rude, but at times we've experienced it where, somebody never requested an accommodation, they're getting written up and maybe getting to the point of being fired, and then well, I need an accommodation, I have a disability. Well, we gave you all these chances throughout by, letting you know performance was lacking or you weren't doing well, you were failing performance reviews, and we asked if there was anything that we could do to further support you, and you never requested anything. Now we're getting to the point where we've got to let you go and we've got to move on, and now you're requesting an accommodation. A business doesn't have to take that into consideration when you're getting fired, and then say, well, I need an accommodation so that I can be successful. They've provided ample opportunities, or hopefully they've provided ample opportunities for you to request that, and they can still fire you and be covered even with ADA. And then as far as we always want to talk about promoting people, even if it's somebody with a disability, we want to recognize the skills and abilities of a person, not whether or not they meet a certain visual criteria or emotional or personality criteria. We're looking to support and promote those who deserve that promotion. Ben talked about that, being in the military and have post-traumatic stress. Somebody saying, well, Ben's got post-traumatic stress and being a supervisor is just going to be too much, so we're not going to provide him this opportunity. We'll go with somebody else. That's what we're trying to discourage. Next slide. And I think we talked about that. So I think we got a couple of questions here. As far as insurance not covering the visit, the one thing that I would say is, yeah, there's a possibility there. I have had other people who have gone for uh, they have a really good relationship with their doctor, and they might go for a different reason and say, "Hey, I've got this paperwork. Can you help me?" I'm not going to say yes or no or what insurance should do, but sometimes doctors can help with that. Leah, did you have anything else to add?
I just, Jen, if you'd reach out to me, I'd love to know a little bit more about this situation if you know what happened. Because I don't think this is a common practice for a doctor to say, we're not going to just fill out the paperwork for you, or for insurance to deny a visit. It may happen, and I would love to know more about it, and maybe see if we can provide some education to either the insurance company or to the medical provider about why there are some legal protections for individuals to be able to get this information as needed.
I would also say that if you've been following up and your doctor knows about your diagnoses and things like that, they're already going to have the information on file. And for them to write a quick letter or something usually isn't going to take much out of their time or day. But like I said, if you know the accommodations that you need, providing your medical professional with that information that they can include it is going to save them so much time that I don't think that they'd be unwilling to do it. But like Leah said, there might be situations that maybe some additional training and understanding is needed, or there's something else.
The other thing there is your doctor doesn't need to know what accommodations to suggest for you. All they need to provide is that you have a disabling condition that possibly requires accommodation. Now, the employer, yourself, there's lots of resources. We're a resource. We can provide some consultation. We have our Utah Center for Assistive Technology who can come and do some assessments, offer some guidance about accommodations as well. So when a doctor says, well, I don't want to fill this out because I don't know what accommodation you need, you can say, I don't need you to tell anybody what accommodation I need, just that I have a disability that makes me eligible to be covered by the ADA and to request an accommodation. So we'll go on from that one and go to the next one. Can you be asked to be moved to a different supervisor if you have a disability and the supervisor's been found guilty of discriminating against you? So that's a difficult, I don't know all the details of this. Typically, a reasonable accommodation is not moving the supervisor. It would be training that supervisor, educating that supervisor. If somebody truly discriminated against you, most likely your employer is going to move you to a different team if that's possible anyway. But if it's a single team of a single type of job and this is the only supervisor, that might not be possible. So the hope would be that the employer is disciplining this individual, training this individual, not just the discipline part, but training about why that was inappropriate and discriminatory, and if necessary, that supervisor should either not be in that job or should, have some disciplinary action. So hopefully that answers that. And it's hard to say, everything's case by case and it depends. So it's really hard to say specifically how things are going to work from there. What steps can a Utah employer take to remove biases from hiring and promotion? We'll talk a little bit about that as we're coming up. And does disability need to be disclosed at hiring? And no, you do not need to disclose your disability at hiring to be eligible for an accommodation later. You can start a job and think, hey, I might be okay here. I might not need anything. And then once you get into it, 2 days, 2 years, 6 years down the line and go, hey, I'm going to need an accommodation here. You can request an accommodation all the way from the application process to the time you retire if you need it. So that should be open and an option for every person, because disability is something that you may be born with a disability. You might develop a disability because of life event, accident, injury, or illness. And it could be you have a disability where right now it's not bothering you and it's not an active disability for you, but you have that disability and something changes and that disability becomes more active and you need to request an accommodation. Okay, next slide. And Ben added something there as well. So just a quick conversation about the intersectionality of FMLA and ADA. So there is some crossover here. All the documentation still needs to remain confidential. Everything you're doing, if you're a supervisor or you're the person managing ADA, or if you're wondering what happens to my information if I give it to my ADA coordinator or whoever's managing ADA, that all needs to be kept confidential. When you request an accommodation, you don't need to tell your supervisor what your diagnosis is. You don't need to tell them what your disability is. I just have a disability where I need to do something. Now, when it gets to the person who's coordinating that, they're going to ask for that documentation. And it's a simple, this person has this disability that may require an accommodation. It's not, this is how often they have flare-ups. This is not, these are the symptoms you're going to see. It's none of that information. It's simple and to the point that you have a disability that may require an accommodation. ADA can be an extension of FMLA leave or Family Medical Leave Act leave. So there could be accommodations that are coinciding between the two and they can work together. Work leave is a form of reasonable accommodation, usually an accommodation of last resort that you can use through the Americans with Disabilities Act, but it can be subject to undue hardship. And you can't be gone for 6 months and expect things to, be okay with a small employer that's like, I don't know what I'm going to do for 6 months if this person's gone. That may be an undue hardship. But there's links on the more full slide deck that'll take you to a fact sheet about FMLA and ADA. Next slide. So some things that you can do to build that culture, and that's some of the things that I'm going to recommend that as you look at this, that you share our names and information, you broadcast broadly who we are, and that we can provide training, education, and support to any business of any size across the state of Utah. Anything as simple as a Disability 101 to communicating with and about people with disabilities, serving customers with disabilities, very specific ADA, service animals, that's all things we can do. Now, you can also get involved as an advocate. If this is something that you're passionate about, you can become involved as a citizen and getting, finding and following things on social media that are sharing information about what's happening legislatively or other ways around people with disabilities, following us on social media. If you have a particular group that maybe you have that disability, you have a family member with a disability, get connected to them to see what's going on in that community and things that might be happening there. You can do individual approach, so things that you might do individually to reach out to people you know or your supervisors to say, hey, do you know these resources are available? There's also legal involvement. We have what's called the Disability Law Center that can provide more legal advice if that's something you're looking for. And then just getting involved to know what's happening in the disability community and creating cultures that are more understanding of disability. When we think about the fact that disability is the only marginalized group that any of us could enter into or out of at any time in our life, this impacts all of us at some point through our lifespan. Next slide. So there are some current issues and current things kind of going on that may be of interest. So although 90% of companies claim to prioritize welcoming workplaces, only 4% consider disability in those initiatives. So we really like to focus on the fact that disability is part of that conversation of creating workplaces where people can bring their whole selves to work. And we want to increase the opportunity for individuals to know that they have opportunities for employment and that there are disability-friendly businesses. And we have what is called the People with Disabilities Network, where business partners connect with us, receive training and support, and then may connect with us through our events, such as our Workability Job Fair. We also have the telework issue. So if you would have told me 10 years ago, hey, I need an accommodation of telework, I would tell you that almost 99.9% of companies are going to say telework's not an option, that is not something we can support and not something that's feasible. And then you all know what happened. We had a situation where that became something that everybody was doing, and lots of people here probably teleworked because of what was happening. And companies were able to find that that could be successful. Now we have this pullback now of return to office, which is increasing the requests for accommodations for employers who had a teleworking option. Because telework did allow individuals with more complex or severe disabilities that maybe are not as supported in an office environment to be able to telework and be successful. And that pullback is now creating reasons for people to request accommodation. Now, it may be reasonable, it may be unreasonable. It's hard to say because it is a case-by-case basis, but telework is an accommodation that can be requested. Lots of organizations are doing a hybrid work model so that you have a couple days of telework, but you have to be in the office some. And that might be what needs to happen to make that teleworking situation work and not be unreasonable. And that just really depends on each situation. If this is something that is a situation for you, I'm happy for you to reach out. We can talk through and consult a little bit about how to look at this and work with an employer to see if it might be reasonable. Next slide. So we talked about advocating. So creating ways that you can advocate for those you love or yourself, being a leader in this space. So bringing up those conversations, talking to places you visit if it might not be accessible, and sharing our names and number if that is something that can be helpful. Some things that you can do if you're a leader of an organization is maybe in your newsletter, start posting things about Disability Awareness Months. So April is Autism Awareness Month, maybe having something in there that talks about autism. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, maybe something in the newsletter about your employee assistance program or how people can access supports if they need to. July is Disability Awareness Month because that's the month that the Americans with Disability Act was passed. October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and there's a broad number of others. But if you start talking about it and creating a culture in your organization where people can feel comfortable talking about their disability and knowing that you're interested in making sure people are welcome, that can help. Next slide. So we did share Ask Jen's link, and this is another one. Great resource. It is a rabbit hole. Just know you might spend more time in there than you hoped for. Next slide. So some things that we do here in Utah. Next slide. So actually go back because I forgot we only got the short slides. So in Utah, we have an employer workshop coming up on March 10th. And we'll make sure that you guys all have access to those links. And I believe it's in the longer deck. But an employer workshop is a little more than a half-day event where you come and meet with our team and get training around disability and the resources we provide. We do it at the Division of Services for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And if you come, you get to see a tour of the wood shop for the blind. Full functioning wood shop in the dark. If we can accommodate people who are blind in a wood shop to create inlaid chess sets, guitars, cutting boards, your office, your warehouse, we probably can figure out an accommodation. We'd love to see you guys there if you have time, and registration's open now, so please register for that. We also have things that we do to provide mentoring to individuals. We have a flash mentoring opportunity coming up. If you're willing to volunteer 1 hour of your time virtually to provide a mock interview and review resumes and virtual spaces for individuals, you can sign up for that. And other individuals with disabilities in the state can sign up for that mock interview opportunity. So we'll make sure you get that one as well. And then we have our job fair coming up on April 14th. So this is a place if your business is looking or just wants to get your name out in the community, maybe you don't have current openings, you could attend, talk more with the community, and share how people can prepare for your opportunities. We have a lot of students come in who are trying to do some informational interviewing and learn about what careers might be out there. And we'd love to get the name out of businesses who want to recruit, hire, and retain individuals with disabilities. Okay, next slide. Talked a little bit about Disability Employment Awareness Month, and that's October. So this was the theme for last year. We're hoping the theme for this year comes out soon, but just know that that's something that happens every year. Next slide. We also do the Golden Key Awards. So the Golden Key Awards are an opportunity for us to recognize businesses who've gone above and beyond to recruit, hire, and retain individuals with disabilities. So there's links here on these slides to get to those, the employer workshop and the job fair. Nominations will be opening soon for the Golden Key Awards, and we also have the Disability in Utah Scholarship that is along with our Golden Key Awards. That's a $1,000 scholarship for a youth with a disability who's transitioning from high school to further education or certificate program. Next slide. We're on social media. You can find us there. We're posting lots of things there. You can follow Josh, Ben, and I on LinkedIn. We're getting our flyers out, the information out, and sharing information there as well. Next slide. We'd love your feedback. So if you have your phone, you can quickly take a shot of this and give us feedback. And if you want to be added to our email list, we can add you there. So you'll get information about the events that are coming up and other things that we're doing. So I think that's the last slide. I know we have a couple questions we may not have hit from the anonymous questions.
Do you guys mind if I put your LinkedIn profiles in the chat?
Oh, totally fine.
Perfect. Okay.
So I think we hit on some of the questions, but I want to make sure that we got everything. So we talked about disclosure. We talked about creating a company culture. I believe there was one specifically about neurodiversity. So those again are just things that we want to make sure an employer has the knowledge and insight on that, and we're happy to come and provide trainings. We talked about disclosure. Josh, Ben, is there anything we missed on that? For documentation, the documentation from an employer only needs to be sufficient. It needs to substantiate that you have a disability, but it doesn't need to list the accommodations or broadly say what your disability, how that impacts your body.
Question
Don't
7.
know. Did we miss anything?
Question 7 was more about how can I let my employer know that I have a disability, even if I'm not requesting an accommodation,
Yes.
just so they understand.
So my suggestion there is if you have a disability that you know you might need an accommodation, or maybe you don't, but you know that maybe like neurodiversity, you might have some things that people might assume or judge. You can go to your supervisor and just say, hey, I just want to let you know that I do have a diagnosis of XYZ, whatever. I'm autistic, I'm neurodiverse, I have ADHD, whatever. I'm not asking for an accommodation, but I'm just letting you know that you may notice that in some of my work habits or some of my other things. If I'm ever not being successful or there's concerns, please let me know, because if I don't know, then I don't know how to remedy those situations. So that can be a way to disclose without saying I need an accommodation, but I'm just letting you know that this might be something that people might have questions about. Does that help?
I think that relates to the last question too, question 8. For the neurodivergent population that needs support, advice you'd provide primarily around receiving feedback that is personal in nature and based on opinion rather than fact-based.
Yeah, and that comes back to creating a culture. So if you're a leader in an organization, you can have us come out and do training. We can just have a conversation about Disability 101 so that people who might have questions can get some answers about what is a disability and how does it impact people, and how can I talk to somebody about their disability without being discriminatory or rude. Those are all things that I think company culture comes in big with. As for an individual, knowing what accommodations might work for you is usually your best tool to have. So trying things out, seeing what worked in school for you, what worked in other job settings, going to Ask Jan and kind of doing some research and trying some things out on the side. If you can come in with, hey, I do have this situation, but here's the things that worked for me in the past, and I just want to see if those could work here, kind of takes the stress off of the employer about, I don't know what to do with this. Now, we're always open to come in and have a conversation with an employer. Sharing our flyers for our events, or even telling us, hey, I don't feel comfortable telling my employer about this situation. Would you guys be willing to reach out? We reach out to employers all the time, and I can simply call and say, hey, we have these events coming up and we're reaching out to employers around the state to let them know about this. Would you like to come to this event, or would you like to hear more about our services? It doesn't need to come from you.
Would probably add just one additional thing there, and that is because I've seen this before where let's go back to the neurodivergence, right? Let's say I'm neurodivergent and my boss might be sarcastic, jokey, and has some fun in that way with the team. And maybe because of my neurodivergence, I don't understand it. And maybe when they talk to me about feedback and things that I can improve on, they do it in a roundabout way rather than direct. It would be totally fine, I think, to have that conversation with your supervisor of, look, I'm neurodivergent, and for me to understand what you really mean, I need you to be direct. I need you to tell me directly what's going on, what I need to do to improve so that I can make that improvement, because the approach that you're taking of this roundabout, I don't want to hurt your feelings type of thing doesn't work for me because I don't understand it. So those are some of the things that are good for you to know about yourself so that you and even your supervisor can be successful in your progression. So hopefully that helps with that as well. Are there any other questions? I know that we're at time.
Any questions? Feel free to ask it now. Okay.
We do
Well-
not offend easily. Please feel free to reach out to us and ask us any of the tough questions you have.
Well, thank you guys so much. That was so informative. We're so appreciative of all three of you. I put all of their LinkedIn profiles in the chat. So if you want to connect with them, and then their information is provided as well. If you scan this QR code right here, right? That's going to be all your emails.
I think
On
we have
that,
one more slide too.
this one will be if you want to get on the email list, we send out a lot of great information. So if you want to be on the email list, you can-
Perfect. There we go. Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, you guys. Do we have any other questions? Any last minute things?
I did put the links for the employer workshop and the mentor link in the chat, but Ben will make sure you guys have all this information with all the flyers and registration information.
Great. Hey, thanks for joining us, everyone. Thank you. And
Thank you.
I hope you all have a great day, and hope you guys will all join us on our next Better Way Thursday.
Thank you so much.
See ya.